not a good way to start a recording. There we go. So I have my camera. I'm going speaker view. And section 411, random numbers. Well, for the most part, you've all figured out how to use random numbers. You put them in a program, and I didn't grade the random part too awful. You needed to have it in there, and I'll tell you what I mean by I didn't grade that too awful yet. But random numbers, there's a lot of times I want to be able to generate a random number. Okay, so the common one that we're going to look at today is I want to generate the numbers 1 to 6 because I'm going to simulate rolling a dice. And I did have a course one time in Visual Basic where a lot of what went on in the course was making up games. So random numbers 1 to 6 was important. Random numbers 1 to 13 worked well because I was able to do an ace through a king with that. And lots of things going on with playing games. But for us, we're going to start by taking a look at, do I need an import statement? Is there some sort of utility that I need to import? Yes. So when you're writing a program and you need to do random numbers, you need to include an import statement. Now, there are two different ways to do it. I'm going to stick with what the book does. And to me, this one makes a lot of sense. But when I go and grade AP test, I see another method for creating random numbers. And a couple of you used that. You found a way to do it through the internet, and that's fine as well. The next line that we have to include is going to be something where I want to use the random class. So you're going to see a line of code that says random something. In this case, I call the variable name random number equals new random with parentheses. So you're starting to see this layout over and over and over. And what this is called is instantiating an object. My object name is random num that I've created of a class. And when we get into chapter 6, which isn't really that far off, we're going to be writing our own classes and instantiating our own objects of that class. So this layout is kind of important, and I want you to start to become familiar with seeing it. So I have the class random from up here in my import statement. Random num equals new random empty parentheses. Okay, so my variable name I want to work with here is random num. And I know it's from that class, which means I'm allowed to use methods from that class. So the class is random. My next line, I'm going to say I want a variable num1. I'm going to make it an integer equals random num, which I created up above, which ties me into my random class, dot next int. And now I have a set of parentheses that follow it. What I'm going to do is also include a displacer, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But right now, I have dot next int parentheses. Now, what goes in parentheses is basically how many numbers there are going to be. Okay, if you look in the book, it does max num minus min num plus 1, and I'll show you what that is in a minute. But I usually think of it as how many numbers there are. Okay, so my first example, I have dot next int 6, which means there are going to be 6 numbers. When I generate this next int dot 6, that's giving me the numbers from 0 to 5. All right, if I did next int dot 40, that would give me the numbers 0 to 39. So if I want to get the numbers 1 to 6, and I just generated 0 to 5, I'm going to do a plus 1 to the 0 through 5 to give me 1 through 6. So again, what goes in parentheses is how many there are, and then what I add on the end is going to be a displacer or a starting location. All right, so again, next int 6 gives me 0 to 5. If I add 1, that's going to give me the numbers 1 to 6. Let's go backwards. If I want to generate the numbers from 10 to 20, I'm going to do next int, and how many numbers are there?
20.
Yep, I want to go from 10 to 20.
10.
I hear a 10, okay? So now if I use my fingers and count, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, it looks to me like there's 11 numbers in that range. Dot next int of 11 gives me the numbers from 0 to 10. Now I want to add 10 to get my displacer or my starting point, and I would get the numbers from 10 to 20. Again, the book will do something where they say max minus min plus 1. 20 minus 10 is 10, plus 1 gives me the 11 that I want. So let's try one more. If I want the numbers from 23 to 36, how many numbers are there? Well, I can count in my fingers, or I can do the biggest minus the smallest and add 1. So this is going to be,
14.
yep, next int, 14. So that's going to give me, again, the numbers 0 to 13, but I want to add something to each of those to get the numbers 23 to 36. Looks like I'm going to add 23. How many numbers? Starting location. And again, how many numbers can be found by fingers or max minus min plus 1? All right, so what I'm going to have you do now is I'm going to put you into breakout rooms, and I want you to write in your little group a simple program that's going to simulate rolling of a die 6,000 times. I want you to count how many ones there are, how many twos, how many threes, and so on and so on. There should roughly be about how many of each? About how many ones should there be?
About 1,000.
About 1,000, right? Yeah, each one of them should be about 1,000. So this is something called a simulation. You know, we can rerun it and see how the numbers keep coming out. It's also called a batch program. I hit a button and I get output. And we've seen that a couple of times. So let me pause the recording. Continuing on, the last section we're going to cover in chapter 4 is files, section 4.10. And this is an introduction to files with a quick way to read and write to files. And we don't need much more than that at this point. We're in chapter 4. We're early in the book. We're only halfway through your first course. But I think it's important to learn about the ability to use files. And the reason is because today, everything is turning into this data science, this big data, where you're going to be working with lots of data and coming up with answers. A mathematician will explain all the math you need. You create the program, you get results, and you send it over to a statistician. Okay, so 3 of you will be working together if you're a comp sci major, and a potential career could be what you're doing, dealing with this data science. So when I get ready to work with files, I know that every time in a program I'm going to work with a file, I need to do 3 things. The first thing is to open the file. Second thing is to either read or write to the file, and that's all we're taking a look at right now. There are other things we can do other than read and write, but that's stuff for another day. And then finally, you need to make sure you close the file. Okay? Open the file, then read from the file or write to the file, and then finally close the file. Well, when we're working with files, we're going to work with the first one of 2 types. 2 types of files. One is called a text file. The other one is called a binary file. Text file is one that you can view the data in the file from any text editor. In fact, JGrasp is technically a text editor. You have a text file and you can go in and make changes and save it. You can do it in Notepad. You can open up your data file and look at it. You can change it and do all kinds of stuff with it. That's the one we're going to be working with, the text file. There's also a binary file, and that's one where when you write it to the file, your information will look a little like gibberish because it's written more towards binary than it is towards nice, clean text. The advantage, binary will run faster. Text file has more conversions to get ready to work with. Now, one of the things that when you were doing your code listings for 410, which most of you did, not everybody, but most, you need to make sure the file and the program are saved in the same folder. So wherever you put your program, put your data file. It's going to make it a whole lot easier on you. And then when you get ready to work with your data file, all you need to do is put the name, double quotes, data.txt, double quote. Now, if your data file is somewhere else, you're going to have to include the path in your program to go find it. So in your program, you'd have to put something like double quote C colon backslash backslash my data backslash backslash da 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 and the path to go find it. But for us and for what we're doing, I strongly recommend you put your data file in the same place as your Java program. I probably had 3 students from my online class out of 40 already say their program can't find the data file, and that would be the reason. All right, so starting to take a look at 2 new things that we need to include in our program when we're going to work with the data file. The first one is an import statement. Import java.io.asterisk with a semicolon. Okay, and that asterisk in the old days meant wildcard, everything in there. The second thing you need to make sure is in your program heading, you put these words, throws IO exception. IO is input output, exception is a type of error. So this is going to help the program if it crashes when you're working with a file. So you need to include that import statement, and you also need to make sure you include this throws IO exception. All right, well, code listing 417 got you started with how to write data to a file. And inside of code listing 417, you saw, again, this is calling the class print writer. I have a variable name, or in this case, it's actually called an object once again, equals new print writer. And then I have parentheses where my file name will be, like double quotes data.txt. Now, what that says is I have data.txt, and in my program, I'm going to refer to it by the name out file. So this line, print writer out file equals new print writer, parentheses, wherever the file is, okay? This is saying, hey, in the program, out file is going to return to that file, or make a reference to that file, excuse me. Okay? So I make that link. Now the second new line, in this case, I'm writing to the file. I'm going to use that object name out file and say out file dot println name. So it's going to print a name to the data file. And then finally, out file dot close parentheses semicolon. Now you typed up code listing 417, and when you did, you should have been creating a data file that has these names in. Now, coming back to my file name, if this is a new file name and the file doesn't exist, it will create a new one. If the file name already exists, it will overwrite it. Okay, so when I say print writer out file equals new print writer, and I have the file name, when I'm writing to a file, I'm either resetting one that already exists or I'm creating a new one. So if you ran 417 once, you would have seen it would have created a data file. If you ran it again, you would see that it was actually overwritten. Okay, so 3 important lines for writing. Print writer. I keep saying print writer because I'm pretty sure it's on the quiz or on the test, the word print writer. That's the class where I'm going to instantiate an object out file from. Questions on open, writing, and closing a file. Okay. You also typed in code listing 418. 418 was the one that, excuse me, was called read first line. awful example. I don't like that they just read the first line, but we'll go with it anyhow. Reading from a line. Again, I have this time, I'm going to use the class file. I'm going to say file, and then a lowercase f, file equals new file. And once again, I'm going to include the file name here. So this time, excuse me, I have to add a second line to my open. When I was writing to a file, to get it ready, all I did was say print writer out file. Well, for reading, I need to say file, file equals new file, scanner, input file equals new scanner, and that's the name from up here. So it's almost like I have to give it, I connect the name of the file to the object file, and then I have to connect that file to what I want to call in the program. It's a double step when reading. Okay, so these two take care of opening it. Now, if I want to read in, I have line equals input file dot next line. What if I wanted to read an int? Well, I would have input file dot next int. Okay, next line reads an entire line. Next int would read an integer and go from there. And then once again, when I'm done, I say input file dot close to close the file. Questions on getting started writing a whole bunch of data to a file, questions on having a program that will read a single line from a file. So right now our read is only a single line.
Yeah, when you're reading from the file,
Yeah.
where it says the string line
Right.
equals, yeah. If you were reading an integer, would you have to change it to int line, or would you leave it as string line?
Well, first of all, I'm just copying what they have in the book.
Uh,
And this is my data type string and line. I am way, way, way overboard on, I would rather see your variable declaration string line up in the declaration section. And then down here,
right.
it just say line equals input.
Gotcha.
I don't like that the author did that. So I'm glad you brought that up so I can bellyache about it. So up in my declaration section, I would declare line to be of type string, and then down here just have line.
Gotcha. Okay.
Just like sometimes the author will put a left brace at the end of a line and it doesn't match up with the indenting of a right brace. That drives me crazy too. But that's conversation for another day. Okay, moving along. Couple more things dealing with files. Okay, what if I want to check to see if the file exists? Well, after I make the initial connection, file, and then I have my object name file equals new file and the name of the file, I can take this temporary object name before I do that second step. If I want to see if it exists, I can do if not file exists, because if I just said file exists, that would be true. So if I do the opposite of it, okay? So you can see an example of that in the book. And the other thing, this goes along with that last code listing we were just looking at, the one where it said to read the first line. What if I want to read in continuously? Okay, and it's kind of nice here in Java, and it actually gets a little nicer in C++. So if I take a look at this, scanner input file equals new scanner file. Okay, so I did all my linking. Now I'm going to say while input file dot has next. Well, this value is going to return true. This is going to be a true statement if there's another piece of data in. Now, one of the things I have to make sure I do is read the data in and do some work with it. So when I go back up, it doesn't say, yeah, there's a next. I'm still stuck on the first one and I never move anywhere. And you're going to see that in assignment 7.2. You have to make sure you read something in. So here I'm reading in and I'm saying number equals input file dot next double, because I know it's a file of doubles. So I'm going to read in. So this is a better example because number was declared up in my declaration section. I have double number. So now when I'm down here, number equals input file dot next number. What am I doing? I might be reading the number in. Assignment 4.3, you're reading them in. You're counting how many you're reading in. you're adding the numbers to a total, because when you come out, you're going to find the average, which is going to be the total divided by how many there are. But you're also going to be doing some other work inside of here. So what I just showed you there is going to be a nice help for assignment 4.3. Okay? Any questions? Any questions? Now, you have assignment 4.3, so I'm not going to do any more in-class work with files, but your data file is already created, and you're going to be using what I just mentioned here to help you work with that. Any questions? Any questions at all?